Thank you, Claire. So, like Abe, this is a different type of presentation for me. So, I actually really enjoyed putting it together. So, I'm used to, putting presentations together for scientific conferences or for teaching. So, this is the first time ever I've been able to put together a presentation for, for a lay audience, as it were. So I actually really enjoyed putting this together. And what I've done is basically pull out various different aspects of Parkinson's disease that I think are really interesting, biologically fascinating, but devastating still for patients, but biologically fascinating. Okay, so Parkinson's disease then. Parkinson's disease, as you know, is an age-related condition, and it's caused by the death of brain cells in the brain that are responsible for controlling movement. Okay, and these brain cells make a chemical signal. Do we have a pointer? Yeah. This one here. Okay, so these brain cells make a chemical messenger in our brain called dopamine. Okay, and this is really key in Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's therapies. So, normally these brain cells make dopamine, and it's the release of this dopamine in the brain that allows us to control motor function. Okay, so anytime any of you make a voluntary motor function, you're engaging this neurotransmitter, this chemical signal in your brain to help you to make that movement. So what happens in Parkinson's disease is that these brain cells die, and as a result, patients lose the ability to control their motor function, and their movement becomes very slow, and they develop this rigidity and tremors and all of these motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So, I think one of my friends and colleagues who is a patient is better able to describe the consequences than I am. So I just have about a 1-minute video from him.
When you're diagnosed with Parkinson's, life changes beyond all recognition. Socially, it is a very visible condition, and yet to society it seems to be invisible. No one ever talks about it. It is, to many, a private misery. No one ever mentions becoming frozen overnight in one position and the ongoing sleeplessness. No one ever talks about the side effects of the complex medication regime, which can be as extreme as the Parkinson's symptoms themselves. And no one ever talks about being imprisoned in your own body. And no one ever talks about the psychological changes that face people who live with this chronic condition. Parkinson's removes control. It destroys natural movement. It can be painful. Parkinson's changes everything in life that you used to take for granted.
Okay, so that was Tom Isaacs, who's a Londoner who was diagnosed with Parkinson's in his mid-20s. And like Michael J. Fox, who was also diagnosed with Parkinson's in his 20s and went on to really campaign as a patient advocate and to raise money for charitable funding, Tom Isaacs has done the same in the UK. So he's the UK version of Michael J. Fox. So speaking of Michael J. Fox, he's going to be my case study for what I think is one of the first things that's really biologically fascinating about Parkinson's disease. Okay, so this is Michael J. Fox's autobiography, or the first one. I don't know if anybody has read it, but it's a really good read. So in this book, which was published in 2003, he recounts the first moment when he noticed there was something wrong with his movement. And that was one morning when he woke up on the set of the Doc Hollywood movie, when he was recording that in Florida in 1990. He woke up one morning with a really bad hangover, and he noticed that he couldn't control his one, I think it was the left, the baby finger in one hand, okay, and he couldn't control that, and he put it down to his hangover. But 1 year later, age 29, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And what's really interesting about Parkinson's disease, there's two things here that are really interesting. The first is that by the time somebody first presents with symptoms, like Michael J. Fox did here with just one little finger twitching, the disease is already well underway. By the time somebody presents with symptoms, they've already lost about half of their neurons. Okay? And at the moment, there is nothing that we can do to prevent further cell loss. Okay, so if we had a drug that we could intervene with right here, Michael J. Fox, I'm sure, would be able to live with a twitching pinky for the rest of his life. But we do not have any drugs that can slow down the course of the disease. I actually came up on my Facebook feed this morning was an article about Michael J. Fox, in which he said, I don't know if anybody saw it, if you probably don't follow Michael J. Fox, but they said that he's so bad now that he's probably going to be confined to a wheelchair before he's 60. So the disease has progressed, over the intervening 25 years since he was first diagnosed. So when he was filming the Back to the Future movies, in the 5 years leading up to that Doc Hollywood movie, the disease was ongoing, but he didn't know about it. Okay, so that is one of the first things that fascinating, that our brains are able to compensate for the death of these neurons and maintain normal movement. But when the symptoms do manifest, there is nothing we can do at that stage at the moment to prevent further cell loss. Okay, so the next thing that's really interesting about Parkinson's disease is the cause of the disease. So, despite decades of research, we have a very poor understanding of what causes Parkinson's disease. So in a very small, very, very small subset of patients, it's a genetic cause. There is a direct genetic cause. So some sort of genetic mutation will lead to the disease. And usually that is to an early onset version that affects people when they're very young. But for the vast majority of other people, most of us in this room, or hopefully all of us in this room, if we do develop Parkinson's, there's no reason, we don't know why we've developed Parkinson's disease. So there are, lifestyle factors that contribute. So, for example, people who drink a lot of coffee, that actually protects against Parkinson's disease. People who do, exercise, it's been shown in studies in animals, exercise can prevent the death of these neurons that are involved in Parkinson's disease. Okay, so eating a diet rich in antioxidants can also protect against these diseases. But again, there's no study that's really proven which of these factors will protect. Environmental factors, so a lot of things that we're exposed to in our environment are thought to actually contribute to the development of Parkinson's disease. So I've picked one of these that I think is really interesting. Okay, so this is a plant called the Derris plant. So if any of you are gardeners, you'll probably have heard of Derris. So the roots of this plant contain a chemical called rotenone that is a really effective pesticide. And because it's extracted from the roots of the plant, it's an organic pesticide. So it could be used in organic farming. So, for those of you who are gardeners, as I said, you may be familiar with this Derris dust. So this is a screen grab from McGaw's Garden Centre out in the Headford Road just from a couple of years ago. So you could go into any garden centre and buy this stuff off the shelves, Derris dust, and go home and sprinkle it on your cabbages that you're growing out the back to kill the caterpillars, and then eat it in your dinner. Okay, so, luckily, it does tell you it's only almost non-toxic to humans, which is very reassuring, I don't think, okay? But because this was an organic pesticide, it was also used in commercial organic farming. But luckily, since 2008, this is an EU pesticides database, and you can put in the name of any pesticide here and search for its current status. So thankfully, since 2008, rotenone, where's my pointer gone? Rotenone has been banned from commercial farming in the EU. However, and this, I don't know what the reason for this is, but I presume it's just to do with powerful agricultural lobbyists. For some reason, several countries got an exemption for another 3 years. So even though this pesticide was known to be causally linked to Parkinson's disease, it was still in the UK and Italy and what's the other country that's up there? France. They allowed it to be used in agriculture, in commercial agricultural, organic farming or otherwise for a further 3 years, okay? So you can see here we've got apples, pears, cherries, things like that, potatoes, things that we all eat, things that are in our food chain. So, the message really is, like, even if you're eating organic, you need to continue to scrub your vegetables and wash your fruit before you eat them. Because it's not just this pesticide, there are other pesticides out there that have been linked to Parkinson's disease. Okay, so that's Parkinson's disease, just overview. So now, what about the treatment for Parkinson's disease? So in Parkinson's disease, as I said, it's these brain cells that make this chemical messenger dopamine that die. So for that reason, all of the drug therapy is focused on replacing this chemical messenger dopamine. So it's a dopamine replacement therapy. So you take a drug orally, it'll get into the brain and it'll replace dopamine in your brain. But these have major, major limitations. The first one is that all this is doing is helping to replace the signal in the brain and treating the motor symptoms of the movement disorder. But meanwhile, the neurons are continuing to die and the disease is continuing to progress. So there is nothing that we can do to prevent further neurodegeneration at this stage. Okay? And as well as those major limitations, the drugs are also limited by some really severe side effects. So the first one is, the patients develop abnormal involuntary movements. So when you saw the movie there with Tom Isaacs in it, all of the jerky movements and uncontrollable movements he was doing was not actually his disease. Those were a side effect of the drug therapy for the disease. So these are called dyskinesias, or abnormal movements. Okay, and another thing that is, again, biologically, for a scientist, biologically fascinating, but ultimately devastating for patients, is that patients that are taking these dopamine replacement therapies can also develop addictive, impulse control disorders. So they can develop a gambling addiction, or shopping addiction, or hypersexuality, or sex addiction. And these are screen grabs from newspapers just from 2014, I think. So this is only a relatively recently recognized and acknowledged phenomenon, these addictive-like behaviors that develop in Parkinson's disease as a result of the drug therapy. So these are screen grabs, as I said, just from a couple of years ago, and the scientific acknowledgement of that is only really beginning to gain momentum now as well. So the reason is, again, this is where the biology is really interesting. The reason is that dopamine in our brains doesn't just control movement. It plays another really important role, and that is in reward, okay, making us feel happy. So we have evolved this system in our brains for rewarding us when behaviors that are essential for our survival feel good, so that we'll keep doing them. Okay, it's a system that we've evolved. So sex and eating and all those things, when we do them, we get a hit in the brain, and that hit comes from the dopamine that's being released in the brain. So what's happening with the patients is that they're getting a double hit. When they, go shopping or have sex, not only are they getting the hit from the dopamine that's being released in their brain, they're getting a double hit because they're on dopamine replacement therapy. So the effect of everything is amplified, and that leads to them becoming, addicted. So, people will repeat behaviors that give them pleasure. Okay, and that leads to them becoming addicted to shopping or gambling or sex or whatever it is. So again, it's fascinating, but ultimately really devastating. And I've been talking to the neurologist over in the hospital, some of the neurologists over there, and they say that patients can lose everything in their lives because of their gambling addiction. It's bad enough having Parkinson's disease, but then they destroy all their finances, destroy their families, and lose everything because they've become addicted to gambling. And now gambling is so accessible, with online gambling and all that kind of stuff. So, so what basically at the moment, things are pretty limited for patients with Parkinson's disease. The drugs are really limited. We can't stop neurons from dying. There's no cure, and the drugs have really, unwanted side effects. So what I'm going to move on to now is a little bit of the research that's being done by us and by others in an attempt to find a cure for this disease. And I've picked 3 studies to highlight for you the kind of science that's going on in the world, okay, not necessarily here in Galway. And these are studies that are actually ongoing in patients. These are approaches that are in clinical trials that are an attempt to cure Parkinson's disease. Okay, and some of them will be a little bit shocking, I think, but this is what's actually happening in patients. Okay, so this is the first one. This trial is ongoing at the moment, and it's a cell transplant trial for Parkinson's disease. So the concept here is, if dopamine neurons are dying in the brains of Parkinson's patients, well then can't we transplant other dopamine neurons into the brain to replace them, just like you would if you need a heart transplant. Okay, your heart is failing, therefore we put in a new one. Okay, if your dopamine neurons are dying, can't we just replace them with other ones? But the only place we can get dopamine neurons at the moment is from the developing fetus. About 6 to 9 weeks after conception, the dopamine neurons are born in the brain, and then they're ready to be harvested, and then they can be transplanted out of the fetus and into the Parkinson's patients. So these trials are ongoing right now. Patients are being transplanted with fetal tissue in countries where abortion is legal, obviously. Okay, so with the consent of the female donor, the tissue, instead of being destroyed, is being used in clinical trials. And these studies have been ongoing for some time. This one is a new one. And they've been shown to be really efficacious. So some of the earlier patients that were transplanted about 20 years ago now, and some of them have had a complete recovery from their Parkinson's disease, and that the fetal neurons can survive in the adult brain very well for long periods of time. But actually, I say they can survive very well. The ones that do survive very well, but only a small percentage of them survive. That's one of the problems with this therapy, is that, as Abe said, the brain is a very hostile environment. So these fetal cells are attacked by the brain's immune system, and only about 5% of the cells die, which means that about 12 fetuses are needed for every single Parkinson's disease patient because of the problem with cell survival. Okay, so this is another clinical trial then that's ongoing at the moment, and this is a different approach. So this here is an approach to test a protein called GDNF, which is a protein that helps dopamine neurons to survive and grow. So the concept here is, if dopamine neurons are dying in Parkinson's disease, then if we can get this drug into their brains, it will help their dopamine neurons to survive and grow. But we can't take it as a tablet because it's a protein. It just gets broken down in the body and it's not able to get into the brain. There's a barrier between the body and the brain, and a lot of things can't cross it. And so we have to get this drug, basically, we have to put it straight into the brain. So this trial is ongoing at the moment, and as you can see, again, it's very invasive. The patients are getting, 4 holes drilled into this is all underneath the skull, and they're having 4 implants, cannula implanted deep down into their brain, and then they have a catheter coming out and connected to a pump where the drug will be stored. And for the rest of their lives, they'll have the drug being pumped out through these long tubes that are embedded into their brain, and they'll have to wear that for the rest of their lives. So it's continuous infusion of this drug into the brain. The problem with this is that it's very invasive, and the patients are left with, holes, basically, between their brain and the outside environment. And I actually know somebody who was on this trial, and his cannula got infected, okay, and the infection was started to track down along the tubes, so they all had to be retracted back out of his brain. So, that is one of the problems with this kind of invasive therapy, especially when you leave something in there and you leave the brain open to the external environment. Okay, so that's GDNF, this growth factor that helps dopamine neurons. So a problem with it is delivery, trying to get this has been shown in lots and lots and lots of studies to be effective at helping dopamine neurons to grow, but the problem is delivering it to the brain. So here's another method of delivery. This is a gene therapy trial that's again ongoing at the moment. So in this gene therapy trial, viruses, in fact, in this case, it's the horse version of HIV. It's an equine HIV virus that was genetically engineered to make it safe, and then it was engineered to carry the gene encoding this GDNF protein into the brain. So the virus will basically infect the brain cells of the person and turn them into brain cells that are capable of pumping out this drug. So instead of having the open catheters and the open, holes in the skull and in the brain, it's a once-off delivery of a virus. And this particular patient, Sheila Roy, she came to Galway about a year ago to tell us about, she's on this clinical trial, and she came to Galway about a year ago to tell us about the effect it's had on her. And she has had a dramatic improvement in her Parkinson's disease symptoms. But she's one of only 15 patients in the world who've implanted with this virus so far. So it's very, very, very early stages. All right, so this is where we come in. So we're also targeting this protein, this GDNF protein, and we're trying to overcome the hurdle of getting it into the brain. So we have developed, or we're planning on developing, a new approach of getting this protein into the brain. So this is the EU project that we've just received funding for. It's a €4 million project that will be led by us here in Galway, and that will have collaborators from all across Europe. And our plan is to develop a once-off implantable medical device into the brain of Parkinson's patients that will be capable of modifying the course of the disease. Okay? So what's unique about this approach compared to what I showed you already with the cell transplantation and the GDNF pumping in and the GDNF viruses is that this medical device will be capable of targeting multiple components of the disease all at the same time. So, for example, we are going to target the degeneration and the death that happens, again by pumping, we will get GDNF, this protective protein, into our device and implant it, and then that will help the cells to survive. But we're also going to target inflammation. One of the big features of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases is that when neurons die in our brains, that activates the immune system in the brain. And the immune cells come in and engulf and destroy the cell debris that's in the brain. But then those immune cells become activated. And then the activation of the immune cells can kill other neurons. And then the neurons dying will activate other immune cells. And you end up with this cycle of inflammation and neurodegeneration and inflammation and neurodegeneration. So we're also going to target inflammation. And we can also encapsulate cells in these implants. Now, obviously, abortion is not legal in Ireland, so we will not be implanting fetal tissue. But we can harvest bone marrow stem cells from the bone marrow of patients themselves and encapsulate them in the material and implant that back into the brain. So here's our concept. So we will have biomaterial microspheres that can carry therapeutic factors like GDNF or anti-inflammatory factors. We can have therapeutic cells like the bone marrow stem cells, okay, and they can be encapsulated within a hydrogel. So this is our medical device. So the hydrogel serves to protect everything that's in there, all our therapeutic factors in our cells, from this hostile brain. So, as I said, about 95% of the fetal cells that are transplanted into the brain are destroyed by the immune system. But we have shown again and again that encapsulating cells in a hydrogel protects them from the brain. It forms a barrier between the brain and the implant. So the idea is to implant this into the brain of Parkinson's disease, dampen down the inflammation, dampen down the neurodegeneration, and ultimately, we hope to slow or even halt, or even reverse progression of Parkinson's disease using this medical device. And this will improve motor function in patients and restore the quality of life of the patients, which is really important. So again, I'm going to leave it to my friend, Tom Isaacs, to tell you a little bit about what quality of life means to him.
So I made some graphs to...
Oh yeah, sorry. Before I do that, just to say, he uses the word dyskinesia in his graph. So dyskinesia is the abnormal movements that they suffer as a result of the drug treatment, okay, as a side effect of the drugs.
So I made some graphs to demonstrate what my quality of life depends upon. And the first of these is the amount I'm playing golf. My quality of life here, you'll see the graph, pretty simple graph. As the amount of playing golf goes up, so my quality of life improves. And on this second slide, you'll see that my quality of life depends on how much I'm annoying my wife. As the annoyment of my wife goes up, so my quality of life decreases. You'll see from this graph that there's never a time when I'm not annoying my wife. And finally, my quality of life depends on how much dyskinesia I'm experiencing. Except, of course, while doing the graph, I had dyskinesia.
So he's amazing. Tom Isaacs is genuinely amazing. Like Michael J. Fox, a true advocate for the disease. And I suppose that's one of the problems with Parkinson's disease, is because it primarily affects older people. They don't have a voice. But, devastating, of course, and all as it is, when young people get the disease, they have the energy, like young people like Tom Isaacs or Michael J. Fox, they have the energy to go out and advocate, and raise awareness of the condition. So, thanks very much.